And I think you just have to be, again, fair and impartial.
Hello, my name is Michancy Cramer, and I'm here with candidate for Justice Court, Kristal Bradford, and we are here speaking with our Nevada judges. Good afternoon, Kristal. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing good. How are you doing?
Good. So to start our discussion, I thought I would ask you a little bit about your background.
So I grew up actually in Cerritos, California. It's in close to Los Angeles. It's on the border of Los Angeles County and Orange County. I went to UCLA undergrad. I went to Western State University Law School, and I actually became licensed in 2012 in California. I did mostly civil litigation out there. I have my own firm. And then in 2016, I took the Nevada bar. So people in California, we come to Las Vegas all the time. We think it's just pretty much a city over. So at the time, I have been going to Las Vegas, I would say at least 10 times a year my entire life. I have family out here. So it wasn't nothing new to come out here to take the bar. And when I passed it, I was married. I asked my husband, would you mind moving to Las Vegas? And he was like, no. He's from Flint, Michigan, so he had no ties to California. We decided to move to Las Vegas, and that was in 2018. And we had two more children in Las Vegas, so they are born and raised in Las Vegas. And one of them I actually had on the freeway.
I remember reading about that on your website. That's a great story.
Yes, all my other children came regular births, 6 hours, 8 hours. With her, she came in 12 minutes. We
Wow.
were on our way to Mountain View during the pandemic. We didn't make it. He pulled over on the side of the 515 freeway and he delivered her. And definitely it was a beautiful nightmare. Definitely an experience. And then because it was in the middle of a pandemic, we actually called 911 and asked for an ambulance, and they were like, we don't have any ambulances available because it was the height of the pandemic. So he kept driving, and I showed up to the hospital with her in one arm and my placenta in another arm, and I walked in with the baby.
So your husband was obstetrician and ambulance driver that night.
He was.
Multitasker.
And father.
um, so once you got to Las Vegas, where did you land as far as your career goes?
So when I came to Las Vegas, the first job I interviewed with was the public defender's office when we moved here, and I've been there ever since. So I'm a chief public defender. I've been there for 6 years, and I have been going to court every day for those 6 years, and I call it fighting in the gauntlet, right? I am filing motions, I am um, representing my clients, I handle all criminal matters, so I do preliminary hearings, misdemeanor trials, I've done a couple of jury trials as well, and just really, like I said, just fighting for my clients and fighting and making sure their constitutional rights are definitely upheld.
And the public defender's office does play an important constitutional role in our justice system.
Yes.
Would you tell some of our viewers about what role the PD fills in our system?
Yes. So I believe it was 1968. There was a case that was passed that gives everyone the right to be represented. So anyone in Clark County, if you're facing jail time, has a right to have adequate counsel with them during that process. So once the district attorney office says that that person is facing any amount of jail time, then we get appointed to the case. We don't get to pick and choose our cases. Every person that again is facing jail time, they will get appointed to us. And so I have clients from all different walks of life, which I absolutely love. It gives me a lot of joy to, you know, help people through what a lot of times is the most horrific time of their life. When someone enters in justice court, and that's where I'm running, a lot of times it's their first introduction into the court system. Since justice court does handle all misdemeanor up into trial, and they handle felonies in preliminary hearing, a lot of people, this is the first stop that they go to. So when we are appointed, again, sometimes I have clients who've never been in the criminal system before, so I'm teaching them and holding their hand through the process and really making sure, like I said, that they are treated fairly and impartially and treated with dignity and respect when they are in the courtroom, because a lot of times a lot of people feel like they aren't. And as a public defender, I want to make sure that I am ensuring that I'm doing everything I can as their attorney to not only see them through the process, to give them the best legal advice I can, but to make sure that they feel like their rights are protected.
And as attorneys, no matter the forum, that is our obligation. When you have a client, you zealously represent them,
Yes.
no matter what, when you are their attorney. And so in the PD's office, it's especially relevant because you're talking about somebody's liberty interest at that point.
Yes.
So a few weeks ago, my colleague and I, Lisa Zick, we interviewed Judge Mendoza, and she's a lifetime district attorney.
Yes.
She's a prosecutor. And so I asked her a question. I'm going to ask you the same, but on the flip. So the question I asked her was, I wanted to hear, as a district attorney, what did she learn from the defense bar? And so for you being a longtime public defender, and now you're a chief public defender, I would like to hear what you have learned from your colleagues on the other side of the aisle.
Okay. So believe it or not, when I first went to law school, I actually worked at the district attorney's office in Los Angeles. So what I've learned, I guess, from the district, one thing I've learned is how to evaluate a case. And when I say that, I look at every aspect of the case when I first get it. I look at the evidence that they have, but most importantly, I look at the evidence that they don't have, right? And that's kind of how I'm figuring out, okay, is this a good case that I would absolutely want to take to trial and have a lot of good defenses for? Or is this a case where, I am trying to minimize the damage that has been done, unfortunately? Because unfortunately, there are some circumstances where, I'll put it this way, not every win is a pure not guilty. In my world, sometimes a win is I gave my client a second chance at life. Sometimes a win is I helped my client understand that he or she has a drug problem or a mental illness that they never really coped with, and now they are officially having help and they can cope with it. So I have learned how to work with the district attorney's office, and I kind of give like a breakdown of, I look at the end of the case. I want to see what are my client's goals. And I actually work with the district attorney office to get as close as I can to the end of the case as possible. Sometimes we don't agree and then we ultimately do go to trial. But a lot of times when I am giving the counter offers that I'm giving, or I'm saying why I feel like this case is only worth a misdemeanor, I give great explanation. And what I've learned is when I give those explanations and I show the district attorney where I'm coming from and why I'm asking for what I'm asking for, then they are usually reasonable and we usually come to a solution. So I've learned that even though they're on the other side as me, they're not always necessarily against me. Sometimes we are on the same page with the help that we are trying to get my clients.
Understood. So we're talking about working across the aisle. And one of the hot button items or topics in the past year or so in the legal community here in town has been civility.
Yes.
And one of the things, I have a family court background. I'm in civil practice now, but one of the things I used to say to judges in family court all the time was, Your Honor, you're only seeing what's in court. Which, that's by design. The judges aren't out there investigating or being involved. They are neutral and they only hear what comes into court. But one of the things I used to explain was, sometimes you have attorneys or you have parties, especially in family court, who are acting a certain way that's not necessarily conducive to civility or not necessarily conducive to a good working relationship. And so you'll have people telling lies. You'll have people, especially in family court, people starting fights or disagreements in amongst the larger family unit, just drama, that kind of thing. Or you can have attorneys who are being dishonest, or they'll make one representation and you might think you have an agreement and then you go to court and you don't.
Mhm.
And it gets very frustrating. And so I would always tell the judge, look, Your Honor, yes, I'm not happy here today in court, but you have to understand there's more behind the scenes. And so, what I have found in this interplay with inside court and outside court and the civility is um, just because you come to court and put on a pretty face doesn't necessarily mean that we're engaging in civil behavior. And so, if you were to be elected and you were on the bench and you are faced with an attorney who is clearly frustrated but is being, said, oh, they're being accused of uncivil behavior. I kind of want to hear your philosophy. And I know you can't give me exact, I would rule this way because judges can't do that. But I kind of want to hear your philosophy on that kind of situation where you have the interplay between in court and out of court.
Okay. I think presenting a fair and impartial courtroom is really going to be the big difference, right? So hearing both sides. So sometimes I go to court and I feel like I wasn't heard, or the judge issued a decision before I even spoke, or the judge didn't read my paperwork or my pleadings. And that's what I don't want to do. I want to treat every case as its own case, not give any kind of blanket ruling, or whenever I see this, I'm going to rule this way. Every case is its special, unique case. And at every case, you have to look at all of the facts and the circumstances and even the parties involved. I would say one good thing that I do is try to have everything documented, right? Even when I'm talking to opposing counsel, I try to have everything on an email or recorded, so that way there's at least a record of it. So the frustration that I might be feeling, at least it's been documented. But also listening to both sides, right? Listening to both sides and making a decision after you've heard all of the evidence is extremely important for the judge to be fair and impartial. So even though, I mean, in our judicial system, someone's going to win and someone's going to lose, right? And I've heard a mediator say, when all of the parties leave not with everything they wanted, then I know I've done a good job, right?
If both sides are mad, it's a
Yes,
good settlement.
it's a good job, right? So what I want is, regardless if someone wins or loses, I want them to leave my courtroom and say, well, at least she heard me out. At least she, made a decision based on the law. Because again, that's my job. My job is to interpret the law and make a decision based on the law, and explain to each side, this is why I'm ruling this way. This is what the law says. And although you might say this, I am ruling this way because. And I think when you explain to people why you are doing it, and it's reasonable and it's fair and it's not coming off like you have any kind of bias towards them, I think that the parties understand that, they appreciate that, and I think everyone walks away feeling good. Because at the end of the day, I think when we go to court, we know one side is going to get a more favorable outcome than the other. That's why we're in court. If that wasn't the case, we would be able to settle it without the judge, right? We wouldn't need the judge there. And then coming from a criminal background, I know, and even my client knows, the other side is not on our agenda, right? I'm trying to get one outcome, and usually they're trying to get another outcome. So again, having a judge that I know is following the law, having a judge that I know read everything and listened to me before they issued a ruling, I think that's how you have civility in the courtroom.
I like that. I do think that the listening is a big part of it. So something you said a minute ago, you were talking about your impressions of the case, and sometimes what you do gives your client a second chance. And that made me think of our specialty courts.
Yes.
And so I know we have like drug court.
We do.
And I know we have veterans court. And I'm not sure if Judge Moss has got it up and running, but I believe Judge Moss, she's retired out of family court, and I believe she was working on getting a gambling addiction court.
I believe there is there was a gambling diversion court, I believe, but I know we have mental health court that's done by Judge Nadia Wood, and We have Justice Court, Drug Court, Justice Court, Veteran Court, Justice Court, Mental Health Court. So we have a few specialty courts, and those are good ways for, like you said, giving someone a second chance or giving them the tools that they need to fight the battles that they have to fight, right? So it gives them an out that's not just throwing them in prison or throwing them in jail and locking them up, because yes, they'll do some time, but eventually they'll be back out. And so what have they learned other than just doing
How to
some
get by in jail.
Yes. So if we want to really work on being a better society, then we need to rehabilitate people as much as possible, right? And these programs are good ways to do that, to give people the tools that they need so that after they do either time, or if it is a suspended sentence, or whatever they're doing after that, they're done, so they don't go back in that repeated behavioral pattern. Now they have a new outlook and a new way to handle their situation. So I do like specialty core options.
And as someone who's been in the PD's office for several years, do you feel like that reduces recidivism in the community?
I do, because I get to see someone usually at the beginning all the way to the end. And I've had many clients come back to me. One in my mind particular, he had a lengthy record. He did, but he promised me, we talked a lot. We talked a lot about the case, because as a public defender, I really like to get to know my clients. I like to know their backstory. How do we get here? Most people have a backstory. They don't just wake up one day and start going out and committing crimes. They usually have a backstory, and I like to learn it. I think that's important for me to be their advocate. And I had someone with a lengthy record who said, I have been to prison every single time. I've never got a chance at probation. I've never did any kind of inpatient or any drug help. And I did plead him to adult drug court. He graduated. He called me. He showed up to court. He was crying. I would think I was crying. I think the judge was crying. We're all crying because he said something like, I've never had a job, a car, a place to live, and a gold chain ever in my life, and now I have all four.
Wow.
And so some people they need, just like I said, the tools that push, and they have changed their life. And I've seen it because I've gotten phone calls about that. And then, for instance, there's Hope for Prisoners graduation that I believe is next Tuesday, showing graduates that have completed the program, people who are changing their life, and that's headed by John Ponder. If people in the community go to things like that and they hear people's stories, I think that they would be hopeful that a lot of times people can be rehabilitated back into society.
Especially if they get a job, because at that
Yes.
point they don't have time to do anything else.
Yes. And jobs also help people have own something that they don't want to lose, right?
Sometimes sense of dignity.
Yeah.
Sometimes knowing that you can earn a living and take care of yourself, it gives you a sense of dignity.
Yeah, and purpose.
Mm-hmm. Right? So one area which you probably don't see that much as a public defender, but we see it on the news. We have a couple of infamous cases in the local court systems, but that is pro se litigants.
Yes.
So what is your philosophy, and what would be your philosophy were you to be on the bench in dealing with pro se litigants? Because even in, like you talked about, you do have a right to counsel in a criminal proceeding, and we do have several pretty notorious examples of people who have refused counsel, and they're gonna do it themselves.
Yes. And the law says they can, right? So I think I would be very patient and open to pro se litigants, because at the end of the day, they do have a right to represent themselves. In the criminal side, we have something called a phoretic canvas, and what that is certain questions that judges will ask to make sure that this person is making that decision to not be represented by counsel, but to represent themselves, making sure that it's freely done, making sure that they understand what they're doing, because in the criminal world, it's a lot of consequences if you um, don't properly represent yourself. Although you have the right to represent yourself, if you don't do it properly, there are consequences. People can, spend a lot of time in prison. So a lot of judges want to make sure the person understands that. They want to make sure there's no what we call competency concerns, where they're incompetent, right? Although they're representing themselves, they still have to do it competently. So once they are able to pass that FREDA challenge, they have a constitutional right to represent themselves, and I support that. That is the law. That is what our system does allow them. And so I think as a judge, that would be okay, because again, that's my job is to follow the law. At the end of the day, to be follow law and be fair. And so I wouldn't have a problem with that. I understand though a lot of judges, get a it slows down the judicial process, which I know
it does.
And sometimes individuals, especially on the criminal side, don't understand that as a judge, I'm a neutral party. I cannot give legal advice, right? So they may ask, because I've seen in cases where there's multiple defendants, one may represent themselves. I've seen people ask the judge, well, judge, what does this mean? Or what does this deal or this charge means? And I think you just have to be, again, fair and impartial. I can't give legal advice to you. However, if you want to represent yourself, you have that right. You are competent, you've passed the FREDA canvas, you have that right. However, the beauty of our system is you still have that right to have an attorney. Now, in the criminal world, I don't think they do. In the civil world, there is something else called standby counsel, where it's, a lot of times our office is standby counsel, and it's not liked because we kind of are standing by. We can't really intervene. And if we see something wrong, sometimes it's really hard for us as attorneys to not want to completely take the case over. But they do have that option to have a standby counsel if the judge does allow that.
It is hard for attorneys not to want to just take over all of
Yes.
us. It's an occupational hazard, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Now, we are here on Our Nevada Judges, and there are some big stories going on with media in the courtroom. In fact, we have, I would say, an international interest up in Washoe County with the Murdoch Trust case. And so I'm interested in your philosophy on media in the courtroom. So I know as a public defender, criminal trials are always open. Criminal
Yes.
proceedings are always open to the public. I myself came from a family court background, and that's been the biggest hurdle. They have some really antiquated statutes with relation to domestic proceedings that the family court bench and bar have both utilized to keep those proceedings sealed as much as they can. And that is being litigated, and I think even now there's still some writs pending or being recently ruled on at the Supreme Court level with regard to media access. And I know the Murdoch case is being litigated actively now by both our Nevada judges and by international media, because there is such an interest in that case. And so I'm just interested in your philosophy. What's your philosophy on media in the courtroom?
I think the media should be allowed in the courtroom under, the current law. I understand that if there's some kind of concern for privacy issues, or like you said, in the family world, there might be children involved, there might be certain privacy concerns, but outside of that, these proceedings are public. They should be public. I know that there's observers that like to come and watch in court, and I think that they should be open, and I'm always skeptical of anyone that, as a judge, doesn't want any media at all in their courtroom, right?
I join you in that sentiment.
So I think that without the privacy concerns, and a lot of times in criminal cases, we don't have that aspect, right? We don't have the privacy concerns that the family law would have. And I do believe, again, it should be open to the public. These are public proceedings, and a lot of organizations and groups do come to watch the courtroom. They want to see what's going on. And again, I think it builds trust in the court system, right? If you are allowed to come in and watch certain procedures, then and you see how the judge is ruling and you see if the judge is fair and impartial, then I think it builds trust in our judicial system.
I agree with you on that as well. Um, so you mentioned that you did civil work in California. Can you talk a little bit about what kind of civil work you did?
Yeah, so I did personal injury and I did a lot of like bankruptcy, debt consolidation. Um, the civil world, you're not in the courtroom as much. You know, a lot of
True.
things are handled by a demand letter or insurance companies. You know, and I really didn't like that. I didn't like arguing over money and um, not being in the courtroom and resolving the cases. So when I did do civil law, it wasn't giving me, I felt like the passion that I needed. It was just fighting over money and a lot of time spent with insurance companies. So when I moved to the criminal world, I felt like, okay, this is where I need to be. This is where I belong. I like being in court. I like having my clients in court. I like filing motions and being very active in the courtroom. So I prefer civil over criminal, but I do have a background in both, and I'm very knowledgeable in both.
And our neighbors to the west there in California, we have very similar case law,
We
and
do.
we even look to California when we don't have an opinion to look to from
Yes.
our own Supreme Court. Um, so I wanted to ask you about your opponent. Now, I don't have much experience in criminal or justice court. I think I've, maybe confirmed counsel for a colleague once in a while here or there. But your opponent is a very popular man.
Yes.
And so, as the um, as the challenger, you have an uphill battle. Statistically speaking, in elections, the challenger just has an uphill battle. And you picked a very popular judge to run against. He has a lot of admirers in the community. So tell me, why did you choose such a popular incumbent to run against?
Well, I did pick a popular judge. It was not just me and him in the beginning. It was a third person in our race that was not as popular, and even the sentiment of feeling of that might not be the best judge for my clients, right? For handling criminal cases, and I did, decide to put my name in that race, and I did make it out the primaries. I did pick a popular opponent. However, he said multiple times that after this he's retiring, and I'm just starting, right? My fire is just starting. And I think that with him, I give the public a very different perspective, right? We are very different walks of life, very different backgrounds, and even in our careers, like I said, I'm just starting and very passionate. So I think that I picked the right race to be in. It's an uphill battle, but I like uphill challenges. I like uphill battles. I know there are allegations that my opponent, right now is not following the law in our campaign trail, which is very unfortunate. But I'm just continuing to focus on me and my race, and I do feel like I am doing very well. And like I said, I want to create a fair and impartial, respectable courtroom. And so I got to just focus on me and keep my face and my thoughts to the finish line, right? And so that's why I'm running. And unfortunately, any race that you pick, you're going to have to go against usually one other person, right?
True.
So,
Yes.
we just have to decide and hope that the race that we choose is the best race for us. And again, I give a very different perspective for the voters.
All right. So I think we're getting close to the end, but I wanted to ask you, and this is totally not related to the law.
Okay.
But tell me what you like about Las Vegas. What's your favorite restaurant?
So, my favorite restaurant, let me think about that because there are a lot. Um, there's Paradise Island. It's a Jamaican restaurant. I really like that. They play music. On the weekends, it's dancing. I really like that. I like restaurants that are I guess consider like hole in the walls, right?
Okay, yeah.
So those are the types of restaurants that I like, those that are in the community, right? Mario's is a great restaurant in North Las Vegas. So those are kind of the restaurants I
The
like.
real local places, not the
Yes,
chains.
not
Yeah.
the chains, not the big places on the strip. I know I'm a true local when I like to stay off the strip, like us locals
Yes.
do. But those are the type of places that I like. And then even some of the loungy type places, like you have, like I said, a lot of places that are really involved in the community. Mariposas is really involved in the community. Classic Jewel is very involved in the community, and they also serve food at both of those places. But those are kind of the places that I like.
Nice. And what part of town do you live in? What neighborhoods?
I live in East Side,
On the east side.
so it's
Okay.
almost to where if you just go all the way to Sahara and to the mountains, and that's where I live.
Okay.
And I love it. Every year in so Sunrise Manor area, but every year we have a lot of kids for Halloween. It's a very family community, and
There are some beautiful neighborhoods up there on the mountain
yes,
too. Yes, Sunrise does have some beautiful homes.
yes. But I'm about 30 minutes from everything.
Yeah, well, you kind of run into that when you
Hmm.
go too far east, too far west, too far north, too far south. You get kind of too far out.
Yes.
Okay. So wrapping up, is there anything you would like to tell the voters that we haven't covered here today?
Um, so I would just say that if you want to know more about me, my platform, you can go to kristalbradford.com and everything is on there. You can also donate on kristalbradford.com, and just remember that it is crystal clear that you want justice, and I am the only crystal on the ballot.